In this video, I'm going to talk about the joys and struggles of being an elementary school counselor. Currently, I'm a middle school counselor and I work with 7th grade, but I have been an elementary school counselor. I've worked with grades kindergarten all the way through 5th grade, and I'm going to talk about what's worked and what didn't work. Some of the things that I loved about it, the pros and cons, so stick around. So, I started off in a very large elementary school. There were about 1,200 students. There were 2 counselors, and you probably see my head bopping up and down, but I'm walking, so don't mind that. I look like a bobblehead or like one of those Funko Pops. But anyway, so I worked with elementary school, and my very first year at that very large school, I had, what grades did I have? I think I did all 6 grade levels, K through 5, and that was a struggle. I could create a whole nother video on that. I learned so much about like how to differentiate lessons and how to make sure that I adapt them for all grade levels, but that's not what this video is for. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of working with that grade level. So let's start with some of the pros. I loved being an elementary school counselor because you get to work with the littles, and the littles will literally treat you like a celebrity. Every time that they see you, they give you all the fresh hugs. They're so excited to see you. They are happy to learn from you when you come in the classroom. And you don't really always get that with middle school students. Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So that's one plus. But one of the cons, though, let me talk about some stories about working with kindergartners. I don't want to say they're all cons. I'm going to talk about the good parts first. So when I went in to do lessons with kindergarten students, I read stories with them. We did little mini lessons and things like that. But if you've ever worked with elementary school students, and if you have, drop it in the comments below. I want to see, are you an elementary school counselor and you're watching this? Or even if you're considering elementary school in your grad school or you're doing a practicum with that grade level. When you're doing lessons with them, sometimes they get off task and they get a little squirrely and they can't sit still or they're not listening. So I had to learn some strategies to work with those elementary school students, especially when I was doing story time. So one thing that I learned that really worked was I would read the stories to them and I would make sure that I would use like a little funny, silly voice depending on what the characters were in the story. There's this series that I used to use in some books that hopefully you've heard of, but it's the Howard B. Wigglebottom series. I'm not really sure who the author is. I can add it to the video after I'm done. But the Howard B. Wigglebottom series was absolutely amazing because they had cartoons that go along with the lessons. So the storybooks were really funny. They had a character who was a bunny and he had so many different things. Like one of my favorite ones was the anger management book, and it taught all about anger. But anyway, they had cartoons to go with each one of the stories. They had posters that you can print out. They had printables and little things that you can use with your lessons. And that helped to keep the attention of my littles. So, of course, I would read the story in the funny voices with them, and then I would play the videos, and then I would play the cartoons for them afterwards just so they could hear it and see it and actually see the story play forward. And if you want to watch those or you want to get the series, you can go buy the books on anywhere like Amazon or a bookstore, but the website to go watch the videos and cartoons is wedolisten.org, and I'll put it in the video too. But working with that group, of course, when you're reading any type of story, you're going to get some interruptions. You're going to get some students raising their hands and want to tell you all about the things that are going on in their household, or they're going to tell you about what their dog did or things like that. And you have to make room to entertain those things, but at the same time, you got to keep the pace and flow of your lesson. We did 45-minute classroom lessons, and that's very long for kindergarten. So again, that cartoon, reading the book helped, and then doing the activities, which is usually like a color sheet or something that they could cut or glue and paste or something like that. But anyway, that was one of the things that I loved about it. I loved being able to do the silly voices and do the dress up days and things like that. So that was one of the pros of working with that grade band in elementary. So one of the cons was you have to teach lessons all the time. But if you're a teacher and you're coming out of the classroom, this may or may not bother you that much, but you do have to teach a lot of lessons. So with it being such a large school, I had 27 lessons that I would teach once every 2 weeks, and it could be a lot. It really did get to the point where I had to teach classes maybe 3 or 4 times a day, and it can get overwhelming when you're teaching that much. But the second year I learned my lesson. So the first year, like I mentioned earlier in this video, I was doing all 6 grade bands, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and that can be a lot. The second year I was at that school, me and my co-counselor split up the grade bands. So she did kindergarten, 2nd, and 4th grade, and I did 1, 3, and 5. And I wanted to do it that way because I wanted some experience working with the littles. I loved working with the smaller children. and I love working with the older ones too. So we wanted to do that for the best of both worlds. I've heard how some counselors split up their grade bands and work like K through 2 and the other ones work 3 through 5. So that way one particular counselor is working with the littles and one is working with the upper students. But I enjoyed working with all of them. So that was just some things. So one of the other cons, I mentioned that I had to teach lessons all the time, which could get overwhelming. But the other thing was that I was put in the rotation. So if you're an elementary school counselor, you're probably aware of what this means. I was put in the rotation with the library, art, music, and all those things. And so that way the teachers had to get a break, and that had its ups and downs. So that meant that whenever it's time for me to go teach a classroom lesson, the teachers would be on their planning periods. I was basically giving those teachers their break. And that's not always best, especially if you're a brand new counselor, but sometimes students are not on their best behavior because they're out of their norm. You know, that teacher has already set up rules, procedures, and expectations, and you're a brand new counselor and you're coming in there and doing lessons with them. Those students may try to take advantage of you, and they may misbehave or get off task. And that was definitely one of the cons. And it took me a little bit of time working around that, especially having elementary school students and having all of those needs. But it was something I eventually got over, and I loved elementary school counseling. As I mentioned, that was one of the things that actually got overwhelming, is teaching the lessons every single day, going in there teaching classroom counseling lessons, especially when there was a crisis going on and you have to tell that student or that parent that you can't meet with them. One of the things that burnt me out with working in elementary schools was the fact that I was teaching classroom counseling lessons every single day without a break. And if you're not organized or you're not prepared, especially at that particular school, we didn't have a curriculum that the school or the district purchased. So me and my co-counselor, Elaine, we had to create our own lessons. And that can be overwhelming if you don't have the right resources or the right support. And thankfully, I'm a creative person, so ideas came to me easily as far as classroom counseling lessons. But again, I was teaching classroom lessons every day, and it just got to be overwhelming, which is why I transitioned over to middle school counseling, and I absolutely love it. Of course, there's some pros and cons of working in middle school too. I don't enjoy the scheduling aspect of it or all the administrative paperwork, the 504s and things like that, but that's a whole nother video. I would definitely say if you're considering being an elementary school counselor, when you go into the interview, be sure to ask specific questions, especially if you want to be prepared and you know what you're getting into. Like, for example, again, I would ask, do you have a set curriculum that you've already purchased, or am I creating lessons myself? What's the schedule? How many times will I be doing classroom counseling lessons? What additional duties will I have to do as a school counselor in this setting? How will I measure success? And these are just some of the examples of some interview questions I always ask to make sure that I am prepared and make sure that I know that I want to accept this position. But again, I'm in middle school and I currently love it, and I don't plan on leaving anytime soon. And in this video, I briefly mentioned some strategies that I use to work with students who are fidgeting or who cause disruptions in the classroom setting when I would go in and teach lessons. If you would like to hear more about that, comment disruptions in the comment section, and I'll make a whole nother video about how I would work with students who were off task and make sure that I was able to teach my lesson and do it effectively.